We basically have three drafts that are not yet completed. One is SDP examples, which we think we're pretty much ready to go with after this, but we don't really need to talk about. We have IP handling, where we have this one issue about MDNS names for host candidates, and then security architecture document. We have a couple of PRs related to that. And so, sorry? So most of the PRs got merged, which was good. So there are two that are outstanding, which is delicious, because that means we could almost be done. But I guess what we'd like to start off with the IP handling stuff. But before we get there, the whole plan here, right, is to get it done. At this point, we need to pick this thing up and get it across the finish line, and we need your help. So I think we're in the process of doing that, and we're cautiously optimistic that we can actually do that. All right, I think with that, I think we have Justin is going to be up.
Magnus Westlund, one thing more about getting finished. I want to note that there's one outstanding document before we get started on this topic in the payload working group, which is a direct dependency for the effect document, and that's I asked them to review with comments, etc. It would really be good if people comments or etc. or reads and comments and gets this help getting this done, because that's otherwise it's going to be the last document out. So.
Fair enough. Noted. Thanks. All right, Justin.
Hi, I'm Justin Uberti from Google. UN from Apple is going to join me up here to talk about this. All right, so IP handling. Let's start by sort of recapping like where the point of this draft is. And the goal here was to take for arbitrary web pages. Previously, we gave out all ICE candidates, and this created some problems. The two most specific problems were that by giving out every single sort of IP address that the ICE agent can find, this allowed people who were behind VPNs to have their public ISP address identified. This was not good. In addition, giving out all the set of addresses allowed more fingerprinting, and we'll get to more about this later. But these are the two main things we were trying to address with this draft. And in addition to solving these problems, we also wanted to maintain the ability to actually establish direct peer-to-peer connections. And why do we care about arbitrary web pages being able to establish peer-to-peer connections? Well, it turns out that this is actually a very frequently used functionality. That there's actually 5 times as many page loads in Chrome use data channels as use actually Rtcweb for audio and video. And this traffic has been growing exponentially over 400% year over year. Is actually starting to make a blip on the compared to overall HTTP traffic. Data channels is actually starting to the traffic there is actually starting to become comparable, or on its way to become comparable. So this is actually a big deal. We don't want to cut this thing off. It's a very promising emerging technology. We want to find some way of having our cake and eating it too. All right, so we solved the first problem with the first version of this draft, and this was basically saying that when a web page doesn't have consent, it should only be able to access the public IPs that the website would normally see. And so this was done by basically determining what interface would be used to talk to the website, and only giving out the IPs associated with the adapter that would be used, the same one that we used to talking to the website over HTTP, using that for actual WebRTC traffic. And so what we ended up doing was we gave out just that one public IP, but we also gave out its associated private IP. And so we considered this an acceptable trade-off, because we wanted to make sure we could allow these direct connections. We thought that the actual IP before information given out was fairly minimal. It wasn't really uniquely identifying. And overall, the cutting off the ability to have direct connections, seemed like a pretty big downside. However, we knew there are some cases that the IP4 addresses might actually contain valuable information. There are some efforts going on to try to reduce the number of fingerprinting surfaces, on the web. And in doing some enumeration of what people are actually doing with WebRTC, an analysis of Chrome stats showed that there is a non-trivial number of pages that basically create a peer connection, get addresses, and then do nothing else. And even after we implemented this solution for problem 1. So what to do? turn it over to Ewan.
Okay, so in Safari, we went to our privacy team, and basically they said there's one rule. You can send anything that is already public, but if it's private, please do not send it. So we decided to use mod 3 by default, mod 2 when get user media is on, and ship this. It's better to ship something than nothing. So, and some people were happy, so it was already good. Still, we broke some existing applications that are running in other browsers. We got some feedback. We got some pretty good feedback, actually, from things like WebTorrent, where they do not really care. Webinar, kind of okay. But still, there are some applications like games where latency is important, so turn is not really good. And there are also some apps that are like sending a massive amount of data between devices and where turn might be too expensive, or very small apps where turn is already too expensive. So, okay. So we looked at it and said, hey, why not use MDNS? So when you gather ICE candidates, you have host candidates with IPv4 addresses. So why not generate a UUID, register it through MDNS, and then replace in the field the IP address with this UUID. That's what we did. We implemented it into Safari behind a flag. So it's available. You can activate it and play with it. It's not 100% well implemented, so it could be optimized, but still it's available. You can play with it. And then the good thing is that we were able to get some early experiments. The good thing is that it's working very well as expected on unmanaged networks, meaning like small offices, networks, home. Like if you play a game, maybe it's at home and not at work. So maybe there it will almost get everything working. It's true that it's adding some potential latency due to MDNS resolution to connection setup. It's not, I don't think it's a big deal, but still it's something that should be noted. It does not always work on enterprise networks, that's for sure. So it's not like a full solution. Some networks will disable multicast. If you're not on the same network segment, then MDNS will probably not work as well. I should note that any app that expects direct host-to-host connection working in an enterprise network might face some issues anyway, because you have no guarantee. So you need to have anyway some other solution like turn servers, like something like that, that will allow you to actually ensure that you will connect the people you actually want. But still,
can I ask you a quick clarifying question?
Sure.
Behind the flag, if you enable it to test it right now, when you're doing the ICE candidate presentation, are you presenting the MDNS and a public IP, or just MDNS?
So what we're doing is that in case get user media access is granted, we do not use MDNS. We submit the private IP addresses like before.
Okay.
When get user media access is not granted,
So no consent, right?
No consent. We're just sending MDNS candidates.
Okay, that's useful for following this analysis, because
Okay.
it means that in this case there was no public IP and therefore no possibility of using a turn server for the current set of tests you're giving the results from.
Sure, yeah. So that's it. So get back to Justin, maybe.
Okay, so to try to come up with the best possible solution that gets the minimal sort of privacy impact and the maximal likelihood of connectivity, the thing we sort of came up with was to use MDNS to hide private addresses. Any v4 or v6 addresses that are public, and how we determine that's public is like something we can talk about on a later slide. Give those out because that's something the website could see anyway. And then the nice sort of thing about this solution would be that as IPv6 deployment proceeds, the need to rely on MDNS goes away. And so you can see from the diagram here kind of what would happen, that you have this client that's multi-homed, It's got, a solid interface, WAN. It's got the Wi-Fi interface, which has both a V4 and a V6. The V4 address is your typical netted V4. That gets hidden and is covered by does this thing work? Yes. The MDNS name. The V6 address is public. That's here. And then the actual public, server reflexive address that learns from the stun server is also given out. And you can see that the local address here is omitted from the RAdder. So this is what we propose, is the sort of sweet spot in terms of what we can make work today.
Yeah. So Martin Thompson, just to clarify, the V6 address, you determine that it is actually public by observing it as a reflexive candidate?
So we'll get to exactly how that works later, but that's I think the only way you can actually do that is by actually having stun over IPv6.
Right.
Now that has its own set of complications. Come back to that later, but this seems safe.
So just make sure I clarify first. So
your name, please, Eric.
Eric Rtcweb. So you had 4 addresses, you're exposing 3 candidates. Is the idea that UUID dereferences to both IP addresses in some way?
I think I should let you speak to it specifically.
Usually what happens is that if you resolve a DNS or MDNS candidate, you will pick whatever is available. And if you have both an IPv4 and an IPv6, then you will get an IPv6 address. You will use the IPv6 address. In that case, probably you will have one of these host candidates. You will not have all 3 at the same time anyway.
So why don't you instead have one UUID per candidate you would expose now, instead of having why don't instead of having 3 candidates, why don't you have 4 with two, one corresponding to 1, 2, 3, 4, one corresponding to 1, 9, 2? Huh? No. What? Well, I mean, there certainly are plenty of situations where you'd have multiple addresses, right? I guess I'm just trying to understand why. And I also read in your draft, you said that you only advertise one MDNS for both IPv4 and V6. So, ICE is designed to have 1 candidate per address.
Right.
Yeah. So Martin Thompson, I think this is a good observation. It's very simple to say that I'm going to bind to this address and then do whatever is necessary for this. I think this is just an optimization on their front. I don't think it actually changes the nature of this at all. To use the same label or same MDNS address to refer to multiple host candidates. I mean, it's just an optimization.
If you can resolve MDNS, then you're good. I mean, the whole reason we give out the IPv6 at all is just in the case where MDNS does not work.
No, I agree with that. But I guess what I'm saying is that, these addresses have different priorities and they have different foundations and bases. And so, so gluing all these sort of private objects together into one thing, it screws the ice out.
Okay. Well, here it was just going to glue the V4 and the V6 with the Wi-Fi address. But yes, that is true that they would have different priorities.
Totally. I'd also like to point out that there will be cases where the IPv6 address has a different scope, especially on wired interfaces. So you may be able to use MDNS and have a different scope than you would have the public IPv6 address. So you may be getting a different IPv6 address than this IPv6 address because it reflects a different IPv6 scope. So I think having a separate UUID, if you want to use a UUID to front that separate scope, is a good idea.
So just to be clear, that it would be a separate UUID for the V4 and each V6 a UUID that's per address, essentially.
Yes, essentially.
So Martin Thompson, I was going to say that's probably necessary in this case because of the way that we do the pairing up and the prioritization and all those sorts of things. I'd missed that point, and that's a really good point.
John, thanks. Yeah, the ICE spec does say that if you have a name and a candidate, you only take one address from it, preferring V6 if there's both. But you never take more than one address for a candidate by name. So yeah, we need to have a different UUID per address you want to advertise.
Right, and so we need to make some changes in MDLink too, which
No, I think that's it already says that.
it says DNS, not MDNS, but yeah.
Okay, well, it's a subset. Actually, it's a superset. I think this is okay. I looked into this and I was a little concerned about the use of these labels, but we kind of get away with that. MDNS supports more labels than names can express, so we'll have to be a little bit careful about the
So yeah, in terms of
restrictions on the characters.
privacy, the lifetime of the names could be tied to the page, for instance, page lifetime.
I should damn well hope
Yeah.
so. But Origin would be what I would recommend. But I wouldn't do anything special to retain stability over multiple uses. That's ridiculous. Double keyed Origin, yeah. Actually, we had this discussion, and yeah, it's tricky.
Yeah, we have a slide on this later. So my hope is to kind of get through the stuff that is mostly not controversial first, and then we can get to the tricky stuff. Okay, so I'd like to try to get a sense of, given the urgency to get across the finish line, as our chairs reminded us earlier, is this a path that we can agree to move forward with?
So your chairs would like you to amend this consensus call. And that is to change IP handling document to documents, because we believe that what's in one of the documents is in fact quite well understood, where some of this is still being worked out on the floor, and that they don't necessarily need to appear at the same time. And having some IP handling document would allow you to move forward with the security architecture and get the baseline covered, and then bring the MDNS stuff along. We'll keep the working group open to handle it, but not gate on it.
Yeah, so Martin Thompson, I think that's my preferred approach for this. If we can find a way to just adjust the IP handling document so that it doesn't add this new stuff, then and describe some modes and maybe recommends the safer option of the set, and then we can later on update it with the new things.
I think that the base thing that we'd be requiring out of IP handling is to note that other modes may be published.
Right.
And make this the first of the new modes.
Right.
And then once the new mode is published, we can decide as we're processing it whether it becomes the preferred mode or not. In the meantime, we'll have ones with which we have a fair amount of experimentation and experience available for the community, and we can cross the finish line while the new modes are being experimented with, and this hybrid mode in particular sees some real deployment to get a sense of it.
Right, because this is now on the critical path, and there's a lot of other things that are very, very, very close to finished. If we put another thing on that critical path right now, I think some people might get stabbed.
Right, so I think that cluster 238 can go, if we release IP handling and note in IP handling that more modes will be published, and keep working on this as a new mode.
That makes sense, but I think we also probably need to amend the problem statement to say that we are going to try to solve this.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that we can put in the problem statement that new modes are being developed to solve that problem.
Sounds good.
Yeah, I guess I would, I roughly concur with that proposal. One thing is obviously that also can perfectly well have an informative reference to this exact draft. That's quite permissible. Say, new modes are developed, including this draft here.
Yeah, as long as it's not a normative reference,
Exactly,
it doesn't block.
I guess I can imagine, and I suspect my colleague may be rising to suggest that we not do this. Like in terms of practical matter, like blocking these documents will not make the change, the implementation change any faster.
Over here is Rtcweb. Leonard Grell asks, do I understand correctly that the current default mode would remain as of draft version 09 for now?
It sounds like what is being recommended by the chairs is that the current IP handling draft would not add any additional modes or change its default.
But that a new mode could change the default on publication.
Sure.
Essentially just adding some text in the problem statement section to say there are other modes that could come along. We can point to this document informatively, which may yank it along faster. And that's about it.
So Adam Roach is area director, and I apologize if someone said this already, but the intention would be to publish the new mode as something outside of this working group then?
No, it would be follow-on work, but IP handling could go, and we could start cluster 238 processing without this, since the reference to this
would
be
be
informative. But the new draft would still be on the standards track when published, and therefore could update the default mode.
Okay, and we would keep the working group open for that last document.
That's a different question. I think it probably would be, but the critical thing is getting the documents out. If the working group has to stay open to publish this, then your chairs will be willing to do that.
Okay, you can have more crows then.
Yes,
All right, thank you.
we're hoping to make them ever smaller and cuter as time gets on.
This is DKG. So the idea that we're going to try to get this out the door with the default mode being the one that leaks the private addresses, just by adding text that says we are going to add a new mode later, or newer modes may be added later, does make me nervous as someone who would like to see this thing published. I am concerned that what we're doing is we're basically saying, here's the way you do it, not even mentioning what the privacy implications are, and something will come along later, and then we lose steam.
We do know what the privacy implications are in the document, just to be clear.
And say this is a problem with the current specification?
I mean, I think we would say that this is not yet solved in the specification. The new modes may be defined. I mean, also practically speaking, like each browser now has made its decision of what it's going to do. So I don't think this will actually change, any actual implementations. Everyone who is involved here is kind of either at the mic or in line or standing up here, and so people will be implementing the new draft, I think, as soon as we actually have experimental details.
Bernardo Mo from Microsoft. Just want to point out one little thing, which is we have had it's an issue, it probably will be a PR soon, for a change in the web IDL to address to make it capable of carrying those MDNS names. And we were willing to take it because people hadn't implemented that thing yet. And I'm kind of a little scared that they'll implement the old one, and then we'll have to go and then we'll have an argument about changing it. It could be a little nasty. So it's okay if you do the new thing, but please do it quickly, because if this stays as it is, there'll probably be a web IDL argument about it.
Well, not for me in any case. Rtcweb, yeah, and I think what I would say is, we're interested in this mode. We'd like to understand how it works. I think you characterized it accurately, which is some scenarios it works in, some scenarios it doesn't. And we're interested in seeing measurements about like how often those two things occur, which I suspect you are as well. And that but that like having these documents stuffed in the RC editor queue for a year and a half while you evaluate those questions or whatever it is not gonna it's not gonna make us like more aggressive about implementing the mode.
So Colin Jennings, I think there's a lot. It's hard to make this call because there's a lot of unknowns we don't know about this. Like we have questions about does just enabling this allow you to do DDoS attacks on the multicast traffic inside the enterprise just by creating a lot of these, and what are sort of the rates and stuff of that? How well does it actually work in enterprise? I mean, the case where this tends. The way you described where it works and doesn't work, I agree. In fact, I think it may be even slightly better than as you described it. It does work in some large enterprises, but not in lots, right? Those are, of course, exactly some of the places this is most valuable. In the home residential NAT situation, it didn't matter that you hairpinned through the NAT anyway. It wasn't like you went across the WAN because the address filtering was such that you could hairpin on the NAT versus having to go to a term server. So I think we start looking at some of those statistics. Now, the thing that I'm interested in about this is not just strictly a security improvement. It makes a bunch of security much worse. And what it makes much worse is it now forces a whole bunch of traffic that didn't used to have to go through middle boxes to go up through middle boxes that are typically run by somebody who's not really fully trusted by the end users in these cases. And anytime that we start taking traffic that could have remained on a local network and not have to push it through a place that's an awesome place for law enforcement to intercept it, Yeah, it makes me a little queasy. I mean, this is not a win-win situation. I think there's a lot of things to think about the trade-offs on which way that you end up with best security.
So to return to the consensus call, which has been up here for a number of moments, I'm going to take 3 hums. The first is, do you think you understand the problem?
Can you take this off the slide? Because nothing more
Okay,
Yeah, that's my favorite.
I'll move up to hybrid solution.
Thanks.
We're going to ask, do you think you understand the problem? We're then going to ask if you can live with this being in a separate document, and if you cannot live with this being in a separate document. Because I think that if it's in a separate document, we can progress it after we've gotten some of this experimentation in front of the working group. If it has to be in this document, we'll move forward a different way. But what we really want to know is whether or not you can live with this being in a separate document or not. So anybody have questions on the hums before we take the hums? I think if you think we shouldn't do this at all, that is, it shouldn't even be in a separate document, you should be at the mic. You want to tell us that? Okay.
Sure. I mean, I think that we will need to see a lot more of the details on this before the working group comes to consensus about whether this is awesome or what it is and how it does. I mean,
So I think the
Yeah,
worst
that's
case
pretty clear,
scenario
right?
here is we
So-
put it into a separate document that goes out with a very limited applicability statement or never goes out.
But of course, I think that putting it into another document is no guarantee that we're actually, of what happens, right? The working group will come to whatever consensus it comes on. Whether it goes in the same document or a different document, there's a lot of work that needs to be done before
Right.
we're done with this, and it will need working group consensus.
Yeah, so Ted, I think just to be clear, are we humming for document acceptance now, or are we really accepting for separation?
The 3 are,
I heard what the hums were,
okay,
but I'm just
if the hum to, yes, we can live with it being in a separate document, comes through, then we will talk about accepting the
Thank you.
draft as a working group draft. Okay? Ronnie, you have to go to the thing because we have remote participants.
Ronnie, but you said there'll be a reference for that in the main document, which makes it like,
So we can put a reference in the main document and that reference doesn't even have to be an accepted working group draft to say people are working on it, for example, over here.
In case people read me as the other way, I will be humming in favor of accepting it as a working group document, right? Like, I think that was almost inevitable that it'll get that. Just, we don't, let's cross this nightmare if we come to it, right?
So any more hum questions before we take the hums? Hum now if you think you understand the problem. Whew, I'm relieved. If it was dead quiet at that point, I would be like, you're going to have to bring me a live crow at this point. That picture is not cutting it. Okay. Hum now if you can live with us separating this document out from IP handling. Hum now if you cannot live with that solution. Okay, I think that what we're going to do then is, okay, I heard the hums as enough people understood the question to go forward with a working group call for consensus on separating or not separating, and then the strong consensus for separating the document out of IP handling.
So I'd like to propose we adopt this as a working group item as soon as we can sort out milestones with our ADs.
I am now going to take a hum on this point. All in favor of adopting the draft as a working group draft? Hum now. Is there anyone opposed to adopting this as a working group draft? Hum now. Okay, so it is adopted as a working group draft. We will work with the AD to add a work item and the schedule of crow consumption. Thank you very much.
One additional point for the minutes that I guess Justin's going to update the IP handling document to update the problem statement and have a forward reference, an informative forward reference.
Okay, I think you had something beyond consensus to chat about.
How much time do we have? I think I will sort of note the remaining issues as things that we can, think about. We won't have a detailed discussion. I'm guessing I have 2-3 minutes at most. Okay.
No question.
Okay. So one of the things I mentioned earlier was what to do about IPv6 addresses that are not public. So first of all, to even determine if a v6 address is public, you need to hit a stun server to see if you get that reflected back to you. This is problematic. This can occur for NAT64 addresses, where you have basically a NAT, which is a v4, and then you get a v6 address that's only usable behind that NAT. In order to figure this out, you need a stun server that can basically receive v6 traffic. I am not aware of, there are very few of these today. So we would basically be asking data channel applications to be deploying v6 stun servers. And then even once we have this, then if you are behind NAT64, you won't be able to use that v6 to actually get a direct connection. So we'll do some experiments here. We'll understand if this is a big issue. One of the options could be we just always give out v6s, or one of the modes could be we always give out v6s regardless of whether they're considered to be public or not. This has some some implications for privacy, but since we're not giving out v4s, it still is a move in the right direction. We'll have to see what the experiments show.
I'll allow this, John. I'll note this problem is not unique to v6. It also occurs with v4. You can't tell from an address whether it's private or not. Or you can tell from some addresses that they are private, but if your address is not in those ranges, you don't know.
Absolutely. I mean, fortunately, stun v4 is fairly well deployed, but I agree to be safe, you do need to use stun.
It also means that no application that doesn't have turn servers will work whatsoever.
Turn servers?
Stun servers.
Correct. Right.
Even if your correspondent has a public IP.
Right. Definitely.
So Martin Thompson, I think if we're judging this based on the principles that we've established, then yeah, too bad. If this is not the address that the site is seeing as, well, probably the site is seeing as a matter of communication with it, then why are we giving this out?
Well, we could take a very sort of hardline position on this, or if we see that, it has like a 75% impact on like data channel traffic, then like we might take a more compromising position. Like I think we should not let ourselves get painted in by sort of ideological concerns.
Okay, that's.
I think it might be a browser decision at some point, maybe.
Yeah. Well, ultimately it will be, but I'm wondering why the principled decision is not the one to take here.
I mean, I think we'd say that we would lean toward the principled decision, but like we would probably want to see what the impact of making said principled decision would be.
So I don't think what Harl just said is entirely correct. Namely, if your counterparty knows that they have a public IP address, IPv6 address, they can advertise it. You'll still want to talk to them even in v6. What won't work, so like if they're a server, for instance, what won't work is to clients.
Right.
No clients anyway resolving address.
Right. That if you don't deploy a stun server, even if your addresses are public, you still can't connect.
Affirmative.
Raising another small issue here. Registration of an MDNS address takes around 1 second. When are you going to do it?
Registration does not take that much time. It's mostly the resolution that might take some time.
Registration requires that you advertise the address on a network and then wait for a while to see if anyone else wants it.
So with our testing, there's no 1 second delay for a connection setup. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that so for the first connection, you might have a small delay. So in some measurements, we had like 200 millisecond delay. It highly depends if you're on Wi-Fi or not, if there are like packet loss. So we might be able to make measurements there to precisely know.
Yeah. So Martin Thompson, I don't think you need to worry about this one. These are extremely high entropy values. The chance of a collision is basically
packet loss. in the resolution, if you
So packet loss in the resolution is a concern, yes, I agree. But the concern that Harold has with respect to advertising a name, that you have to check that someone else has it, I wouldn't bother checking in this case.
Oh, okay. So what you're saying is that you can get away with breaking the protocol for MDNS.
Yes. Yes.
That will be interesting to see reviewed by the other working group.
So if people are uncomfortable with that, we can go talk to DNSSD and talk about having an exception carved out for that. I think that's a perfectly reasonable thing to do. So again, that's not a big concern.
So, context. It gets a little bit more complicated when the address went out through multiple interfaces, and then the SD proxies forwarded them back to the other things. It gets more complicated. That's all I'm saying on stuff, right?
so
Like regularly on MDS, one of the bugs is your printers show up on multiple networks when you have a complex network
So-
technology.
so mode
Show
for,
up different addresses. The same DNS name will resolve to different addresses depending on which interface you take it on.
This is now. I think we just had 2 minutes, and we've already consumed like 10 of them. But no, I mean, like what's gonna happen is you're gonna advertise you take the host candidate and you stuff it in the DNS record, and that's what you broadcast. What happens is that inappropriate address appears on multiple networks, but it's the same address on all those networks because you're going to generate a new host candidate for a new MDS entry for each host candidate. And so what'll happen is like it'll be just like ordinary ICE, which is to say they have like a pile of addresses, none of which you can use. That should I don't think that's a technical problem. It's just goofy, right? But it's like ICE is inherently goofy in this way. I think now what will happen is like maybe you're going to get a bunch of like weird packets like off the network's bridge. You're making a bunch of packets that like really don't want the same address.
Niels Omer. One clarifying question. So this is, you need the stun server only for net64, or are there other cases where you would want to require a stun server? Because I'm not quite, I don't have like all the details for net64 in my mind, but I think there are like other ways to detect that you are on a net64, aren't there?
NetX4 is the only case I know, but I cannot guarantee that I'm correct.
Do you want to go on to the next slide?
Yes. You want to talk to this one?
Yeah. So when you have a single WebRTC connection between two peers, you can identify whether they're running on the same device by checking the latency of the connection. Some might say it's fine. Some might say that if you have 2 pages with 2 iframes that are trackers, and you are trying to isolate these 2 trackers so that they do not share state, which is actually what is implemented in Safari, then allowing these 2 tracker iframes to know that they're running in the same device and start to use WebSocket to share state, share cookies and everything might be an issue. So we are actually investigating that. The point there is, should we document this issue somewhere? Is it a real issue? And if so, what's the path forward?
I mean, this is an issue. There's a lot. I mean, I guess I'm, you know, like I feel like all our worst nightmares about like co-located code have now come true. So like you know, it's a quaint to, in the face of Spectre, it's kind of quaint to worry about like determining you're on the same host name at this point in the game. Perhaps if you're Chrome, you feel differently, but if there are people who don't have site isolation, you may feel that way.
It will come.
Huh?
It will come.
So we're also working on it. And more seriously, there's just a lot of ways to determine, I think, if you're like on the same host. You sort of say it's not clear solution for V6, but as far as I can tell, there's no clear solution at all. Unless, I mean, perhaps you can disable, if you disable RTC in like some context, but imagine like the common thing will be the two-part, if like these, if you double key, right, you're still going to have the same MDNS problem.
It's up to a browser to decide which UUID to share with on which contexts.
I'm assuming you share different UUIDs, but then basically what I do is I take the, I have two domains that I want to see if they're co-located in the double keyed, and I have both of them exfiltrate the addresses, and then I try to go over to the call, and like if it works, then like I'm basically on the same machine, or I'm in the same local network. So, I don't know. I tend to think that like this is, I mean, it's fine to put this stuff that's in the IP handling document in a paragraph, but I don't think much else is going to be is useful. It's really an open research question.
So before we're going to cut the line because we do have one other presentation, and I guess we should float the idea maybe of having a virtual owner or something to talk about some of these issues specifically, because I think we could go down a rabbit hole on this one for a while.
Well, since we are trying to progress the document, could we agree that we should add the paragraph to document this issue, and then we could resolve this in the to be announced sequel?
Absolutely.
In a similar way that we identify in W3C documents a fingerprinting issue, I mean, I think it's calling out this issue is perfectly fine. I mean, but there are so many ways you can track this. Like, as the which way is up force sensor on iPhone seem to be a high risk candidate.
Let's kill them one after the other.
Yeah. Yet no one wants to kill the really high runner ones. So what about this one? And this brings me to the question here is, I don't understand what the solution would be for V4 or V6. I don't understand how we solve this at all for V6 or V4.
Yes. So you can isolate iframes. You can.
But how do we end up telling there's no latency basically between these two?
So one potential solution is that third-party iframes do not have MDNS.
But I mean, if we're going to allow WebRTC connections, like where I'm going here is the only solution to this is to add huge latency to our real-time communication system.
Well, then
and that's not really very high on my list.
Sure, and then you can use probability to actually measure whether it's fake latency and so on, blah, blah, blah. I don't have a good solution there right now. So
what's your take on should we try to solve this?
It's not high priority because it's true that there are other issues, but I think it should be in the roadmap, and maybe we'll find some solutions. Maybe on our side, we will just disable, like we're in a space in Safari where we are very restrictive. And what we're hoping to do is to open the door a little bit. So we can open the door like just a little bit or a little bit more, not on iframes, maybe on iframes. We have some granularity there that we can play with.
Okay, that sounds good.
Since I think that the current proposal is that we will document this issue in the IP handling draft and then consider solutions in the follow-on draft. Please indicate when you're standing up at the mic line whether you have any problem with us documenting the issue, because I think we can postpone discussion of the solutions till the discussion of the follow-on draft if we have agreement that we're documenting the issue.
My only point was that, sorry, Niels Omer, is that I think the RDT is actually not the biggest problem. I mean, if you have like two iframes being able to establish a data channel, they can exchange whatever they want, right? I mean, it's like far worse with.
So if you would like to document something else, a PR is welcome.
This is DKG. I'm for documenting the issue. I just wanted to point out, because it seemed like there was some confusion in the discussion, that this is a WebRTC issue and not an MDNS issue.
Yes.
Okay, just making sure that we're all on the same page on that.
I think we are on that page. Do you have one more slide?
Just one final note. One of the line commenters had mentioned that like if we can't establish a direct connection, we'll typically fall back to hairpinning through the NAT. And in doing some tests here, I was surprised by how infrequently hairpinning actually occurred, even in today's internet on some fairly popular NAT products. And did you see the same thing?
Yeah, I haven't seen hairpinning really work in normal conditions personally. So, but my testing is limited, and I hope that as soon as we get that maybe people will be able to, will get better results there.
So you can kind of infer from that, like popular Google and Apple Wi-Fi products may not support hairpinning super well. But anyway, the test that we'll do will probably bring some more concrete numbers on this. Anyway, until next time.
So thanks to both of you for the presentation today and for agreeing to move forward. I think it's a good thing to move forward with this in the way that we've described. I think the chairs will caucus offline with their area director about having an interim meeting. As I think DKG pointed out, just making this a forward reference as a promise and losing steam is probably problematic. So trying to keep some of the discussion going on the list and in an interim meeting seems to us like a valuable way to avoid that. And we'll do what we can to do so. I think the next speaker is Krister.
Okay, so I did a STP directorate review of the STP attribute, which is defined in this Rtcweb security architecture document. Just to clarify, this is not my document. I'm not the author of this. The reason I'm up here is because, well, I have indicated I'm willing to help with the STP issues and so on. But before really starting to write text, there were some issues that I think we need to agree on, or to make sure we have a common understanding to not have to rewrite a lot of things. So also to make clear, this is not a general overview of the whole document, only the STP part, attribute part of it. So if you have other issues, you know, with the IDP and identity assertion in general, this is not time and place for that. So this, and also I'm not going, the review that I did, for example, Martin has already created a pull request on that. I think the link is on the mailing list. It's also, I'm going to show it here at the end of the presentations. So there are basically a couple of main issues which I'm going to bring up here, which I think we need to agree on and to make sure. Okay. So basically, the background I also said, but the assumption here is because this draft is for as it's written in this working group is very RTC specific. But our assumption here is that the STP identity attribute is a generic attribute which can be used to carry identity association also in other environments, not really WebRTC specific. And even if one pair is a WebRTC endpoint, the other pair may not be, but it could still use the same identity assertion mechanism so that's the assumption, to have a generic attribute which can be used by anyone supporting an IDP assertion mechanism. So this is one of the issues which I raised in this, is that currently in WebRTC, the fingerprint is used to create this identity assertion. One of the questions I raised is that, do you have to use the fingerprint always, or could you use also something else? And the answer I got, and now when I say answer here, this is discussion I've had and what people have indicated on the list. This is not something we have agreed on, but what those who have provided input is that from a protocol perspective, you could use something else than a fingerprint. It's outside the scope of RTC web draft. We are not going to document other mechanisms, but basically the way forward would be to have some text saying, yeah, you could use something else, but if you use something else, you need to write a draft to some kind of specification describing how you're going to do it, how the JSON structure that you're going to put into this attribute, it looks like, and so on. Because the JSON structure defined in the document now contains the fingerprint and the identity. So if you use something else, you will need to define a JSON structure which carries this other thing. Yes.
Ted Hardy, just a clarifying question. You have here in the answer from a protocol perspective, but here what you mean in particular is this usage of SDP is allowed to use other information, not JSEP, the protocol will use other information, but this SDP identity may use other information. That's what you mean by protocol here.
Yes, I'm not. I'm not suggesting any changes to
It-
JSAP or
I just wanna
Rtcweb or
make that
anything.
clear
Yeah.
Because
No.
it was a little bit,
No, that's a good comment. I should have made that clear. I'm not suggesting any changes to what we have in JSAP or any Rtcweb or WebRTC specification. This is pure SDP, so to say.
Yeah, this is about making sure that the definition of the SDP attribute is consistent with other attributes and all those sorts of things. Largely editorial.
Yeah.
What Krista has actually done is highlight a few places where there's a little hole or two, and that's been quite helpful. But other than that, it's, yeah, don't change anything. We did change something, by the way, but we'll get to that.
The other issue was, which is interesting, is if you have a subsequent offer or answer where actually the pair or even yourself updates the identity. And I have one example where this is case. We often talk about these third-party call controls and call transfers done just by updating the SDP. So you have your browser, for example, is communicating with another pair, and then you have a call controller which is going to make a call transfer. The only way it's going to do is to send you the SDP of this new pair, and obviously this new pair is going to have another identity. So you're going to get an updated SDP, an updated offer with a new identity. Again, the feedback here is that, again, from a pure protocol perspective, we shouldn't disallow this. It's allowed. However, it may not be supported by the receiver. And for example, WebRTC does not allow to update the identity of the pair. So the suggested way forward here is that you say, yeah, you can do this. For example, when you send us, you can do it, but also to indicate that this is not something that anyone must support. If the receiver doesn't support it, it doesn't accept it. It could, for example, not accept the offer answer or do something else. I mean, we don't need to go exactly into those details, but I think the important thing here is that we're not going to mandate endpoint to support it, but again, it is allowed from a protocol perspective. Yes.
John, thanks. What if you 3PCC to an endpoint that doesn't send an identity attribute?
Well, that's, yeah, that's more or less the same thing. I mean, you're basically, you're modifying the existing identity by removing the existing identity, but it's the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah, we call that explicitly, I think, and that means, that implies. I hope JSAP already says that if you ever had identity, all subsequent offers or answers have to contain the same identity.
So the WebRTC, Martin Thompson, sorry. The WebRTC specs are very clear on this point. Once you have an identity for a peer, you can't go backwards from that point. It has to remain the same thereafter. So any session description you receive from that point onwards has to have the same identity, because we don't know how to do anything else. And nothing else really makes any sense. If you want to have a different identity, make a new peer connection, and then it's all good.
First.
And actually, what I'm going to put in the text about this is there's going to be a section about modifying the session, and there's going to be a must. You must include identity, and of course, even if it's the same as previously, not including it means that you're actually removing it. So of course, if that's what you want to do, that's what you want to do. But if you want to keep the same identity as previously, then you must include it in the subsequent offer.
Right, and I think the general policy, I'm in favor of this. The general policy here is what you do with identity is effectively a policy decision about what the security in it means in whatever you're using application. In WebRTC, we have very clear things of what that policy is. In other things, they might have different policies and different rules. And even that way of doing transfer is not generally how it's done because of all kinds of problems like this. So it's not like we're losing transfer in WebRTC or anything. Like the way most SBCs do transfer will work fine with WebRTC. So.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring it up because unfortunately one of the, sure. Whenever we talk about, it's very often when we talk about something and someone asks, how does it work with third-party call controller and so on. So yeah. Those were the actually the main, I consider technical issues or clarifications. So the way forward is, and as have I indicated, I'm willing to help with this. For example, one of the things I didn't bring up here, what I had in my review, was that we should also use this template for defining new SDP attributes. This, if you're ready, I mean, sending initial offer, sending answer, modifying the session, and so on and so on. and I'm willing to help to put a pull request regarding that together. But I wanted these previous things clarified because those things affect what the text there would be.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, and the last thing was that here's a link to this pull request which Martin already put together, and which I understood has been now most things. There were some, for example, related to the ABNF and so minor things.
Yeah, I've merged all those. So thank you for doing this review, and thank you for if you just click reload, I think those are all gone. Yeah, there you go. So thank you for the review, and thank you for catching these. I guess I'm reluctant to screw the structure at this point in the game. I understand. I appreciate your willingness to do it, but it seems like that's really kind of like going to make our lives harder. If there are specific points you think need to be called out, I'm really happy to add them to the document. But I think having a big restructure that we now have to review seems like kind of the wrong way to go.
I think I had a look at the document. Currently, the attribute is defined somewhere in a subsection level 3 or level 4. So something like that. But my idea would be just to move that into a separate main section, and then of course we have to add this sending initial offer answer and blah blah blah. But it's going to be very it's not going to impact other parts of the documents. So it's gonna be a big pull request in the sense that there's a lot of text that's going elsewhere, but most of the existing text, which is not, or all of the existing text which is not related to this attribute, is going to remain the same.
There's a lot of maturity here. There's like a lot of things like that we have to go and review. So I think unless there's some actual law that we have to restructure it this way, I really prefer not to.
The chairs do not believe that there's an actual law, so we would recommend that you generate the pull request and have it reviewed, but it will be up to the editor's discretion to accept or not accept the pull request, depending on the amount of confusion and work you believe it will take.
Okay.
So the key thing is that the material be right and the structure is not normative.
And certainly if you have any points,
Right and complete.
if you have any specific points you think we're missing, please do call them out specifically, because I'm happy to put them in.
Well, I think the things we are missing now is sending this initial offer and modify session. I mean, it could be written in other ways too. And of course, those things that we previously discussed, you're clarifying that, for example, if you use something else than fingerprint, it's just prescribe, and also about this updating identity, there's nothing about that. But I mean, I'm...
Okay, well, I'm happy to take a look, but again, I think there's a huge PR, and I have to live a lot of time reviewing it, trying to determine it's technically the same. That's going to be unfortunate.
And just my suggestion, since all these PRs here now are merged, my suggestion to make life a little easier would be that we submit a new version now where we merge or include this PR, and then this other PR would be based on that new version, because then in that way we avoid pull request conflicts or whatever. Yeah,
Makes sense. The editor has agreed. So
yeah, that's all I had.
okay. Go ahead.
So from a timing perspective, if you were to produce such a PR, obviously you're not going to get it done this week. Do you have a time frame for when you might think you'd be able to?
Well, this is not going to be. I'm going to be away after this week for 2 weeks of vacation. But let's put. I mean, let's say within a month,
Okay,
you will have it.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much. So the only other thing of note is that we are going to, working group last call, the STP examples drafts, probably.
And we have gotten several outside reviews for it. I really want to thank Paul and Fleming and the other reviewers who have already done that. But it is a big piece of work to look at. Please do take some time, grab a few of the examples, go through them. I think anybody who does the whole document is going to be very tired indeed by the end of it, because the productions are very, very complicated. But please do sample a few, given your expertise, and give us comments as fast as you can.
Great.
I believe that closes the meeting. Thanks. If you haven't signed the blue sheet, please do so before leaving.
And where are the blue sheets, by the way? Okay, in the back. Thanks.